As promised, time to take a look at the Steelers. We've been doing it all week, but we know that this woman's one of the more – we just talking about Orlovsky saying he's busy.
Yeah.
Look, Brooke is asking the tough questions in the scrums. She's in Bristol doing her ESPN things, what feels like multiple times a week. She's writing, and she's kind enough to come back on the show with us. So ESPN's Brooke Pryor joins us today. Happy holidays, Brooke. Great to have you back on with us. And, man, you have just been rolling lately.
I mean, I kind of took the spirit of the 3 games in 11 days and said, well, this is my own personal gauntlet, so I'm just going to add in a studio day. Thankfully, it was in New York, not Bristol, so that was an easy train ride down to Philly. But, yeah, it's been one thing after another, but I love it. I don't want to think. I just want to do.
Yeah, Brooke, I think I saw you on Get Up. Was it Get Up a couple weeks ago? I was like, she was very smooth and polished. You're like a print writer, I know, but put her on TV. I was like, and what's funny, it's almost like, what show is it? The Elf, where he's like, I know him. I'm just like, I know her. That's our girl. So we appreciate you coming back to us lowly folk, even though you've made it big on Get Up.
Well, I love coming on with you guys. And yeah, I mean, it worked out perfectly. It was right before the Philly game that I went on Get Up because not only are the Steelers interesting, but also I went to UNC. And I don't know if you guys have heard, they may have hired a former NFL coach that people are very interested to talk about. And, as an alum, I had a lot of thoughts. So it has really been a whirlwind in like the very best way.
I'm sure. Well, we're glad to have you on. We won't keep you too long, but we had Rob King on last month for the first time around. We were like, we got to circle back with her at some point. So that's exactly what we're doing today. And we ask you, what is the state of the Steelers entering Week 16 in a game? Should they win, they take the division crown.
Yeah, I really think that this is a game where the Steelers are going to figure out their trajectory for the rest of the season, which is crazy to say because they are a team that already has 10 wins. They've clinched a spot in the postseason, but it reminds me a lot of the 2020 season when they started out hot, 11-0, dropped a weird COVID rescheduled game to the Commanders, an NFC team that didn't have a ton of regular season implications, but that kicked off this stretch where they ended up then losing 4 of their last 5, hosted the Browns in the playoffs and lost. And it felt like at the time their best chance to win a playoff game since 2016. And so when I look at how they're positioned going into this Ravens game, this is really going to, I think, tell the team, tell all the people watching externally where this season will go after losing to the Eagles. And I don't think that they necessarily have to win this game to determine that outcome. It's more about how they play, how they're responding. I think winning would be huge, obviously, to get that AFC North title. I know Patrick Queen is a guy that is very motivated to get that title in Baltimore. But I think that they need to show, hey, the defense can get stops. They can tackle a lot better because against Philadelphia, it was atrocious. I thought maybe like all of the grease that they used to grease up the light poles for Super Bowls, maybe they just applied to the players the way that Steelers were just simply not able to bring them down. And I think offensively, I need to see Russell Wilson be able to sustain drives, be able to find somebody else down the field, not named George Pickens since he is not an option. And the run game, Arthur Smith compared it to an old truck this week that sometimes takes a while to get going and they kind of plod along. But then once they rev up, they can really rip off some long drives. Like I need to see a run game that doesn't require jumper cables to get started, to really know if this team has a shot to make the playoff run that it looked like they could be positioned to make after winning. The game in Cincinnati is the one that jumps to mind as the most complete football game. Even though they gave up a ton of yards, a ton of points, it still felt like, okay, this is a team that is not just going to make the postseason, but could make a run in the postseason. I need to see them get back to some of the things they did well in that game.
Brooke, after that loss against the Eagles, somebody in the Steelers media asked Mike Tomlin, like, what do you do to make sure that this doesn't snowball? And he gave a great answer. I mean, it's what you would want from a coach. Okay, let's not be dramatic. It was a loss, And yet at the same time, just to emphasize the importance of the game, obviously we know on the Ravens side, like if you lose this, you've lost the AFC North. But it was a legitimate question in that the Ravens need this. They both need it. Ravens probably slightly more desperate. in terms of the AFC North. And sometimes that gives the edge to you. So that would mean something to have it snowball, even though Tomlin downplayed it, don't you think?
Yeah, and that person that asked it was me.
Oh, that was
you! Yeah, that was me. Mike Tomlin loves me in post games, if you can't tell. Because I was thinking about that 2020 season, and I had just talked to Dan Moore in the locker room the week before, and he wasn't on the team in 2020, but he was drafted right after that. And he said that is something that they talked about all the time, about teams can start off hot, but you've got to finish just as hot as you started if you want to be a legitimate team that, makes the postseason, makes a run in the postseason, and that you can't let one game derail the momentum that you had before that. And so, Mike Tomlin is going to dismiss the question, is going to dismiss the idea of letting it snowball. But when you look at the gauntlet that game kicks off, I mean, you have the Ravens, and then a couple days later you play the Chiefs, and then the Bengals. I mean, the Steelers are lucky in a lot of ways that they've already clinched a playoff spot, courtesy of the Colts losing and the Dolphins losing. So at least that's kind of a load of pressure off. But you want to have the opportunity to host a first-round playoff game, because the last time they hosted one against the Browns was the COVID season, and no one was in the stands. It was a very weird feeling, and I think the Steelers have a huge home advantage when they're in Acrisure, so they want to be playing for that. And I think that looking at this gauntlet of games, even the Bengals, even if they're not going to make the playoffs, they can still be a dangerous team, especially if they're still playing all their starters in that regular season finale. And so I think that it's a situation where you can't let that loss to the Eagles linger. You can't let those problems persist, particularly when I look at the offensive side of the ball. To me, that's the most concerning thing. I think the defensive, lack of tackles, missed tackles, things like that was kind of an aberration. I think that they're going to get that corrected. I think TJ Watt is healthy enough to play and be effective, but offensively, there were signs of things that have been a problem for the Steelers throughout the season. That, it's a lot of boom or bust. It's a lot of not drives that just can't be sustained, red zone execution issues. And it felt like maybe they had that put behind them in the one against the Bengals, in the second game against the Browns. But the Eagles game was a sign that, maybe everything is not fixed.
Definitely want to revisit that Watt conversation in just a bit, but because he is expected to go, I feel like, a more pressing issue for them is number 14 not being out there. And that is George Pickens, who had, I believe, 8 for 80 plus the first time these two teams met, even though we all know Pittsburgh did not score a touchdown. It was Chris Boswell who had 6 field goals that resulted in an 18-16 victory. Such a classic Ravens Steelers game. But what's undeniable, Brooke, is the numbers that you see up on the screen here, and Jonas Schaefer compiled them. I mean, this is night and day when Pickens is and isn't with the team. Yards per play drops from 11th to 32nd. Success rate goes from 18th to 32nd. Explosive play rate goes from 13th to 32nd. And we know these guys have been obviously a great connection with the famous moon ball. We know that Pickens is an absolute dog out there from a mentality standpoint. He brings a certain type of intensity. So I guess we ask you, it's not what does this offense look like? We know, we see it up on the screen right now, what it looks like. It's just, where do the Steelers go without Pickens for a third consecutive week?
I mean, the name that keeps popping to my mind is Mike Williams. Mike Williams is not George Pickens, but I think that he's the closest thing the Steelers have on their roster. And to give up a draft pick to trade for him at the deadline, it wasn't necessarily a ton of draft capital, but it's still an asset, especially for a team that does draft really well, especially in the last 2 years. I think that they have got to utilize him more. I know that, he had the game-winning touchdown catch against the Commanders, but that since then, really few and far between. They mainly just use him in 11 personnel. I'd like to see them use him a little bit more and not just put him out on the field, but throw the ball his way. He's really good in contested catches and these tight window catches. That's something that Russell Wilson loves to try. I don't know if it's a matter of he doesn't feel like he has the same rapport with Mike Williams that he has with George Pickens. There's just not as much trust there because it's a guy that's newer to the system. But I think that they've got to establish another vertical threat to open everything else up. Calvin Austin, another guy that I think didn't get used very much in that first Ravens game, that has really come on a lot stronger recently. I love the moment in the Eagles game when Darnell Washington is getting into a fight with Slay in the end zone, and like 5'9" generously Calvin Austin runs in to defend 6'7" Darnell Washington. But like, that just shows the fight that this guy has. I think they've got to use him more. And then I think Pat Freiermuth is going to be a big part of this game plan. Didn't necessarily have the biggest game the first time around against the Ravens, but he's had a touchdown in 3 straight weeks. He's become really dependable, really consistent. And I think that the passing game has got to go a lot through him. And again, just to open everything else up, because you saw against the Eagles without Pickens, they couldn't stretch the field. Everything got more compounded, and they just couldn't run the ball. Najee Harris, of course, fumbles, and that's even worse. But it was, I think, a regression from what they had shown in the 2 games before that.
You both have mentioned TJ Watt. I'm going to play this video courtesy of Brian Botko of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm sure you've seen it. I'm sure you were there and you watched him hit live, Brooke. What percentage do you think he's going to be? Obviously, he's going to play. He's got no injury designation. He looks, listen, it's practice. He's not going to go all out. What percent do you think he'll be playing at? And can Ravens fans tone down their fears of him getting around, say, rookie Roger Rosengarten and getting a sack strip from behind?
I think that TJ Watt is going to be 75 to 85%. I mean, a normal guy, after they limp off the field with an injury like that, I would say 50%. But TJ Watt is not human. He can do just about anything, and has, I think, just this incredible ability to bounce back from injuries. And I think that watching him not only in those moments in practice, but I'm thinking about watching him stretch. There's a stretch where he kind of he alternates what foot comes forward at an angle and is like stretching over top of it. But his ankle was at such an angle pressed against the ground. I thought, oh my gosh, my body can't do that regularly, but like much less when my ankle is sprained. That feels like it would be so incredibly painful. And yet he had no problem doing that, but he was doing a lot of lateral movement, a lot of running off to the side. So I think he's good to go. I also think that if he aggravates it, if he gets out on the field and realizes like, hey, practice was really light this week and we were going 25% and now I'm going 100%, and that my body can't hold up. The depth that they have at outside linebacker in a guy like Alex Highsmith, who didn't play the first time around and has had some really big moments in these games. And then you also factor in Nick Herbig, who's having a really big second season, and Preston Smith, who was acquired at the trade deadline. I think the pass rush position is probably more equipped than most to deal with a player not playing at 100%, even if that player is an all-world guy like TJ Watt.
Who was it that went down right after they acquired Preston?
Alex Highsmith. Believe that was Alex Highsmith. Yeah.
That was only a multi-week thing.
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
He had an ankle sprain against the Colts, I believe. They've had injuries to every single member of that pass rush except Preston Smith. So knock on wood for his sake. But yeah, I mean, at first, the beginning of the season, it was Alex Highsmith had a groin. And then Nick Herbig had a hamstring issue that lingered for a while. Highsmith comes back, then he sprains his ankle. And now TJ Watt dealing with this low ankle sprain. But I mean, by and large, they've got a pretty resilient group to not have to miss, substantial time or anyone have to go on IR.
That's what I remember about that week, because I don't believe Highsmith played week 11. And the thought was, okay, is there going to be a drop off to Preston Smith? Because, what I had heard prior to that acquisition or after the acquisition was we want him to be a rotational guy. But then when Highsmith goes down, he kind of, that they're asking a lot more of him. And so anyway, yes, tons of depth there. What about in the secondary? Because former Raven Deshaun Elliott listed as doubtful. What do you know about his situation? Obviously, he was talking a bunch of junk and had a very impactful game the first time around. He's a hard-hitting, hard-nosed guy, as I'm sure you've learned quickly during his time there. But where's he at right now?
Yeah, I think Deshaun Elliott is the guy that is most concerning for the Steelers that, looks like he's probably going to miss this game. He's dealing with a hamstring injury. I mean, the hamstrings are just really piling up on the Steelers side, but they missed him so much in that Eagles game because he's their best run stopper. He's their best tackler, has, I think, almost 100 tackles, if not more than 100 tackles. He's really been Johnny on the spot when, Nick Herbig has forced, I think 2 of Nick Herbig's forced fumbles have been collected by Deshaun Elliott, and he had a pick in the first game of the season. I mean, he has really flown under the radar when you look at, acquisitions like Russell Wilson, Justin Fields, Patrick Queen, but Deshaun Elliott has been their do-everything guy on the back end, and missing him a second straight game if he doesn't play, that's an area where I think Derrick Henry's got to look at that and say, oh, this is great news. Like, it's going to be not easy to gain yards on the Steelers, but that's one less guy who is an effective tackler not being out there. So I think that's really going to hurt them once again, especially, Terrell Austin, the defensive coordinator, was talking about it this week. Like, he goes under the radar. He's an unsung hero, but the difference he makes not only in, technical things like tackling, being in the right position, communication, he has this intangible energy as the trash talker, as kind of the motor of that defense, of that secondary. He, I think, complements Minkah Fitzpatrick really well, who's been really quiet this season and just quiet in general. He's not a very loud, talkative guy. Deshaun Elliott is all of that. And so I think that that's a guy that they're really going to wish they had. Dante Jackson, cornerback with the back injury. He's been dealing with that all season, listed as questionable. I would think he tries to give it a go. But he didn't finish the last game because that back injury popped back up and was an issue. So they are definitely, I think, the most banged up in the secondary, and that could end up being a problem.
Brooke, I think everybody knows the stat by now. The Ravens have lost 8 of the last 9 against the Steelers, 4 straight. If you talk to people in Baltimore, they talk about, well, Lamar didn't have to play some of them. They already had the AFC North locked up and like to bring in that context. But even when Lamar has played, do you, and I'm really curious about this, it's like the psychological question. Do you get the feeling that Tomlin is confident that he's got John Harbaugh and Lamar Jackson's number, that he knows how to stop this duo? Do you get the feeling that he's got that confidence?
I think so. I mean, and I think part of that is because he's done it. I mean, the thing about Mike Tomlin is that he's never going to get comfortable, and I don't think he's ever going to, take his foot off the gas and say, well, I've got this guy figured out. I don't have to try as hard this week. That's never how he's going to operate. But I do think that not only for him, but this defense as a whole, there is a confidence that comes with the fact that they keep beating the Ravens and keep beating Lamar Jackson. And when you do it often enough, you start to feel like, especially in a game situation where maybe things don't start off well, or, Lamar Jackson has a big first half, whatever it is, in the back of your mind, you say, okay, I've just got to buckle down. I've done this before. I can do it again. And I think having been there, done that, seen it, know what it takes, gives the Steelers a better blueprint than most teams to be able to shut down Lamar Jackson.
And what do you think that blueprint has been?
I think a lot of it's the outside linebackers. This is a game that guys have made such a huge mark on. I think Alex Highsmith had an interception in one of them. TJ Watt has been all over the place. Bud Dupree had some big games. I think that it's just the way that the pass rush is able to attack Lamar Jackson, and they're able to contain him. And I think that that's just a big difference. And also maybe Mike Tomlin has a voodoo doll of Lamar Jackson. That's, maybe that's the big difference maker, because it is kind of mystical the way that they're able to just completely shut him down.
I feel like the disguises they deploy too, like they're throwing the kitchen sink at him. They have the athletes, to your point, on the edges to contain him. They compress the pocket. They make him turnover prone. Like, we've all seen the statistics in those 5 games. And what also should be a part of the conversation, which came up this week, and Aaron Schatz did a good job of explaining it as well. As you know, Brooke, probably this is just the second home game that he'll have faced the Steelers in his career. A lot of them have been due to just circumstances that have to do with rest, potentially in the weeks that they already, and in the years, I should say, that they had the first round bye and the top overall seed locked up. COVID during 2020. He wasn't a starter yet in 2018. Joe Flacco had that position. And then, of course, injuries plagued him in 2021 and 2022. But tell you what, so they have his number in those 5 games, and they certainly have Mark Andrews' number. This is a staggering statistic right here. Mark has played 10 games against Pittsburgh so far, no touchdowns. This is the all-time franchise leader who just hit that number in that category last weekend. In 26 games played against Cleveland and Cincinnati, he's tallied up 18. So what do you think the game plan is for Mark Andrews, especially given the thin nature of where the Ravens currently stand at? Because I don't know if you really, right before you just came on, Nelson Aguilar has been ruled out and Bateman's questionable and was seen yesterday with a walking boot. So just to catch you up to speed on that, I'm sure you've already seen it.
Well, and it's funny too, because as we are talking, the Steelers have downgraded Deshaun Elliott to out. So talk about how thin things are going to be. That does not help the Steelers at all, especially I think against Mark Andrews. And I think that this is going to be a game where they're going to need, I don't know if it's Minkah Fitzpatrick, Joey Porter Jr., instead of being, matched up on a wide receiver with all the injuries they have, that he's going to have to just treat Mark Andrews like that receiving threat, and hack a Shaq the way that he has before on guys like T. Higgins. I mean, Mark Andrews is going to be a problem because he's rolling on a hot streak right now. But it is kind of insane. I don't think I realized that he had not scored a touchdown in 10 games against the Steelers. I covered Mark Andrews when he was at OU. And I mean, he and Baker Mayfield had this great rapport, great connection. It's really great to see him succeeding the way he is in the NFL. But I don't think I put together that I actually had not seen him score a touchdown in person in the NFL since I've been covering the Steelers. That is a very odd anomaly.
Brooke, I know you probably got to go to get that news out. I know you need to tweet it and put it everywhere on the socials. So we'll get you out of here on this. What's your prediction for the game tomorrow? I keep wanting to say Sunday, but it's Saturday.
I know. I think it's going to be a close one. I know the spread is like 6.5 or whatever, which is just insane. I think maybe some of that has to do with TJ Watt's status being somewhat in doubt earlier this week. I kind of think the Ravens are going to win, but it's going to be a weird one, like 17-15, a low-scoring game.
A weird one.
I know. That's never happened in this series before. But I think the idea of Lamar Jackson never playing the Steelers in front of a crowd in Baltimore, I wonder how much of a difference that ends up making in this game. I think it's going to come down to the wire because when has it not? But I do think the Ravens have the edge and they're going to come out on top.
Brooke, not only can you ask the tough questions in media scrums, but you can multitask tweet. That right there should be celebrated. We appreciate you for coming on as always. Let everybody know where you can be found. We already had your Twitter up on the screen, your X handle, but and anything that you have coming up over the next 24 hours or so that maybe would whet some appetites.
Yeah, so there's a story coming out on ESPN.com tomorrow about Ryan Shazier and his transition from player to coach. He's been working with the Steelers running backs this year. I reported on this all the way back in training camp, so I'm really excited for it to finally be coming out tomorrow.
Awesome. Talk about a full circle moment too. That's awesome. So, Brooke, happy holidays. I'm sure we'll be seeing you on our TV screens in the coming weeks, and enjoy Saturday.
Absolutely. Happy holidays, guys. Thanks for having me.
Same to you.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Brooke.
Brooke Pryor, ESPN's finest. Literally,
she was
definitely
like multitasking, which is allowed for sure.
She's the best. You can go find her work online at BE Pryor, and we appreciate her and her time. So,
how funny was it that she was the one that asked the question?
Oh yeah,
about
and not only that.
Yeah.
She's the one that had George Pickens spill the beans on his status like earlier in the year. She generated some great answers yesterday from Russell Wilson about Lamar, being that he's closing in on Michael Vick's all-time record. She's a star. I really enjoy her. So
she's got that job for a reason.
And she never says no to us. It's just like she'll always make it work. So anyway, shout out Brooke Pryor. Now it's time for our predictions. She mentioned it. It's a 6.5 point spread in favor of the Ravens. The over-under is set at 44.5. Sarah, you've already said it, and we've said it time and time again. Pittsburgh has owned this series in recent years. 8 of the last 9, 4 in a row. Division on the line, of course. If Pittsburgh wins, they take the AFC North. If the Ravens win, obviously they'll lock up at the very least a wild card berth with more work to do in order to get the AFC North. No George Pickens, no Deshaun Elliott. TJ Watt is expected to go. For the Ravens, we know they're going to be without Nelson Aguilar, and Rashad Bateman is questionable. We know that. Aguilar was just downgraded to out. If you're just tuning into the show, that's where things currently stand. What say you? Prediction.
Well, I think that she did a good job of outlining the blueprint, and I'm glad that she just she, in a sense, I mean, she gave credit to Tomlin for sure, but then she's like, but it's just great outside linebacker play. And that's got to be a huge, massive part of it. I mean, the theme for sure this year is the Ravens have struggled against elite defensive lines, and that includes the outside linebackers on the edge. Bobby, let me see if I have this in here. Where did I put this? Here it is. Okay. This is the key to the game. And I know we always say that turnovers are the key to the game, but sometimes you just say that in passing. But I've never seen it more true because it's such a part of the Steelers' strategy. As Tony Lombardi pointed out from Russell Street Report, he said the Steelers' success in 2024 is predicated upon opponents making more mistakes than them. The Ravens have had 9 turnovers in the last 4 games versus Pittsburgh, all one-score losses. And you know that Monken knows that too, which is why he had those ball security drills. On 11-17, the Ravens missed 2 field goal attempts, had 3 turnovers and 12 penalties, and lost by 2. The path to victory is obvious. The Ravens, if you look at their turnover margin, they're a +2, which ranks 13th in the league. The Steelers are +18, which is first in the league. That is their strategy. Keep it close with an elite defense. Make the other team commit a turnover. And if possible, hit one deep, but George Pickens is out. So they don't have that. So now this really comes down to, are the Ravens going to truly fix their mistake-prone ways? Bobby, if the Ravens lose, I think it'll be by 4 points or less. Something like 23-21. But if the Ravens win, I think it's because they won't have these mistakes. And so if they don't have these mistakes, I think it could be a 10-point win. Because unless you gift the Steelers field advantage, you give them these short fields, they cannot move the ball. With TJ Watt hobbled and Deshaun Elliott out and George Pickens out, and this being a home game, I have the Ravens. They could blow it. They could beat themselves. They surely could. But I'm going to bet that the Ravens have their mistakes put together enough against this team, and they'll be smart. And so I have the Ravens actually, because I'm predicting a win, I actually think it'll be a bit bigger. I think they'll win by 10. So whether you want to say 27-17, 24-14, I'll do that. But that's all predicated upon the Ravens not shooting themselves in the foot and turning the ball over.
Okay. I got burnt on a high score the first time around. I can't do it again. I can't get burnt again. I thought that I was going to go in that direction week 11, and obviously 18-16 was anything but. Pittsburgh wins the game with 6 freaking field goals, as we've discussed, from Chris Boswell. Now, with that said, with no Pickens, if they couldn't score a touchdown, Sarah, with Pickens on the field, obviously your confidence doesn't exactly skyrocket without Pickens on the field. And we've mentioned the statistics, how much of a drop-off there is. But Pittsburgh's a prideful bunch, as is the Baltimore Ravens. I still think Russell Wilson and company will find a way, whether it's through Freiermuth, whether it's through Calvin Austin, or several other their playmakers, including Najee Harris, who is a pass-catching running back for them, of putting up some points. I am taking the Ravens. I'm going to go 24-20 in a game that you have to be able to withstand the funkiness, the inevitable funkiness. You know it's coming. What way is it going to come? I have no idea. Is it going to be a blocked punt? Is it going to be a ridiculous penalty that was a phantom call that changed the arc of the game? Is it going to be a Peyton Wilson-esque interception, tearing it out of Justice Hill's hands? What's it going to be? You know it's going to somehow, some way, going to be a factor in this game. And can you be resilient? Can you withstand it? Can you play disciplined football? Can you play turnover-free football, which is what Tony was referencing there? So I'll go 24-20. I think this is going to be a game where the tight ends have to be a part of the equation. I'm talking about not just Mark Andrews, because if history repeats itself, they are going to have a plan for him. And it's going to be a successful plan. It's going to be an effective plan. So I'm talking about Isaiah Likely, somebody who's had a relatively quiet year when you look at it full body of work wise in terms of productiveness. And outside of there, you know, who's going to step up? And even if it is a target or two, is it going to be a Tylan Wallace who's had some big plays in the past? Is it going to be because of maybe earning a target or two off of what he did in his debut, or not his debut, but his first touchdown and first catch? Is it going to be a Tez Walker that cements his legacy, at least in the early going in this rivalry? 24-20, a game that is absolutely paramount. It is imperative that the Ravens fan base comes out. If you're thinking about it, if you're on the fence, purchase tickets. Get out there and enjoy it. You won't regret it, because
definitely don't let Steelers buy them.
The Steelers, exactly. The Steelers fan base travels better, as good as anybody across the league. And so that's what I'm going with. I see a lot of folks in the live chat weighing in with their predictions as well. Czar Wright says 34-6. Let's see. Who else has got predictions in here?
Well, as you're looking at those, can I say a couple things to what you just said?
Yeah.
Number one, your prediction of the Ravens winning. Bobby, you are damned if you do, damned if you don't, because they were like, well, now you better not jinx us, Bobby.
Oh, yeah.
They get mad if you pick against the Ravens, but yeah. Number two, the Ravens can't let this be a Justin Tucker game, and not just because he's off, because it's already too close. It's also because he's been off, but this cannot be a field goal game, because that plays into the Steelers' strategy. And the third thing, and I really liked what Bart Scott said this morning on Get Up. He said the Steelers will go with an all-out run blitz on first and second down. And so their what they want to do is shut down Derrick Henry, because everybody keeps because he was in a debate with somebody on Get Up, maybe it was Greeny, and they were like, but you have Derrick Henry, why aren't you using him? Why aren't you using him? He said, and Bart said, you don't understand. The Steelers are purposely trying to make them one-dimensional to where they do that rushing blitz on first and second to try to get you into third and long. That's part of their formula. And I completely agree, because you can't rely on Justin Tucker. And right now you have to score points with Lamar Jackson. He's going to have to put on the cape and throw a little bit on first and second down, or run off of scrambles. Let's not run. Let's get out there and run if we need to. He's going to have to complete a couple of passes on first and second to get them to stop rushing or doing those rush blitzes. So you got to score points with Lamar early. He's got to put his cape on. I know it's a lot to ask of him, but that's what the Ravens are going to have to do. And then if you are able to loosen up that defense and get a bit of a lead, then you can win with Derrick Henry later in the third and fourth quarter. But early on, Lamar's got to put on the cape, and that was the formula that Bart Scott put out this morning, and I agree with him.
How about a hot start, too? Remember, Derrick Henry fumbled on that opening possession the first time around. So ball security, of course, will be at a premium. Lamar Jackson, having an answer, as Dan Orlovsky always talks about, having a plan for pressure. You already know the disguises, the late rotations, everything that Mike Tomlin's going to be throwing at him. There's going to be heavy variety. And I'm not saying Lamar is going to be surprised by anything, because these two opponents know each other better than anybody, arguably, in the entire league. I'm just saying, how will you answer to that kind of pressure? And what's the quick game going to look like? And who are your targets going to be in the quick game? So two other matchups, and then we'll move off of this. And Zone's telling me the stadium's going to be packed. LOL, this ain't Cleveland. Zone, it's a hot ticket. When it's a hot ticket, sometimes people make business decisions. That's all I'm saying. And Pittsburgh travels really well. Again, this is an expensive ticket. This is Christmas weekend and Ravens Steelers in December. So the two matchups that I really want to take a close look at coming up tomorrow is Highsmith on Stanley and Rosengarten on a potentially 75% Watt. That, I mean, right there in the trenches there. That so heavy factors right there. Can Rosengarten hang in there? How much chipping will he need? And Highsmith, he's got a motor. Again, he did not play in that Week 11 game like Brooke confirmed.
Mm-hmm.
And they are very deep. They go deep in the outside linebacker room. So,
yep,
really good stuff. I see a lot of Eileen
we haven't gotten to super chats at all today. We got to get there.
Yeah, we haven't. Tila
Yeah.
says 27-17. Blackula says 27-9. Major Media 35-13. Troy Gale says 24-16. Same thing for Julian. Good stuff, guys. Appreciate that.